Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is still Ikenna Azuike, and it is my pleasure to continue being your host for the WCEF+Climate Conference 2021. Now, it's clear that support for the circular economy is gaining momentum fast, and as we've heard, for good reason. But just how global is the love for circular economy? What circular economy progress has already been booked? What are the obstacles preventing further growth? What concrete steps can we take to overcome them? And just how many questions can I fit into an introduction? Stay tuned to find out the answers to these and many other questions. And joining me as a co-host in this session is none other than perhaps the busiest woman in Dutch politics at the moment. Maybe, one of, certainly. The Dutch Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation, Sigrid Kaag. Welcome, Sigrid.
Thank you, Ikenna.
And joining us as distinguished panelists, we have the African Development Bank President, Dr. Kevin Kariuki. Dr. Kariuki, thank you.
Okay. Vice President, thank you very much.
Okay, Vice President. Well, there's, you see possibilities there.
Yeah, I was wondering what happened.
Thank you for the promotion.
You missed that announcement. My apologies, Doctor. The European Union's Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries, Mr. Virginijus Sinkevičius, welcome. And Costa Rica's Environment and Energy Minister, Andrea Meza. Now, before we get started, don't forget that this conference is as much for our speakers here as it is for you at home. There is no real progress without you being on board, being inspired and being engaged. Use the trusty Ask the Speaker button on your screen, join our conversations, and we'll ask some of your questions and get some answers hopefully later on in the program. Okay, before I talk to our international panel of guests, here's a short video showing the scale and urgency of the climate challenge we face.
Pensa em 7,5 bilhões de pessoas extraindo, transformando e descartando a todo momento. Pensa que esse número aumenta a cada ano que passa e a gente precisa mais e mais. Quer mais e mais. E arranca mais e mais do planeta.
Agora, nem tudo está perdido. Se por um lado nós temos
a quantidade de resíduos que você gera no processo de transformação é muito maior do que no âmbito do consumo do produto, dependendo do tipo de atividade, do tipo de setor econômico, etc. Mas você gera 60%, 70%, 80% de resíduo no processo de fabricação do produto. Aí você pega aquele produto, consome e joga ele fora. Esse sistema, evidentemente, é um sistema suicida. Você pode fazer isso enquanto você tem uma escala mínima, quando você chega numa escala como a atual, ele não é mais sustentável, é absolutamente catastrófico.
Circularity is about changing the soul of our economy. That's it. So it's about the attitude. It's about the attitude towards everything what makes our life possible.
Minister Kaag, this session is about international cooperation, but how is international cooperation going to help solve the local problems like the ones that we just seen in that video?
Well, from local to global and global to local, I think we can't do without international global cooperation, be it from issues of stability to pandemics to actually achieving the SDGs. And for me, the circular economy is a critical enabler in the way we produce and consume that allows us to achieve part of the SDGs, but it's also an attitudinal one where consumers and producers have to make choices. And the question should be asked, if you still insist on doing it the non-circular way, you need to explain to your consumers why. And if you do produce the circular way, you need to tell your consumers what the benefits are. So it's all about, as the architect said, Thomas Rau, it's attitude, it's choices, and it's of course providing for the investment frameworks.
Okay, let's say we do embrace the circular economy. We leave the dusty, old, worn-out linear economy behind. Paint a picture for me. What does the world look like when we embrace the circular economy, perhaps in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, I'll start then with a very local example now, a Netherlands example. You know that we are agricultural producer-exporter number 2 in the world, behind the US. We're sort of a postcard compared to the landscape of the US. we engage in intensive farming. Now, one pathway to actually achieve the emissions that we need to provide for the restoration of nature around and to provide for a decent living wage for our farmers is actually to think in a circular agricultural manner. So we need to provide the investments, the tools, the knowledge, but also the subsidies. So it's less about intensity, it's about quality and doing it close to nature. But that requires a lot of support, government guidance, as I mentioned, choices, and also, of course, pricing. Pricing is extremely important to achieve this. In a developing country, the choice is not there. People in there, by de facto, have been circular all along. We used to call it recycling. It's the poverty trap. But you can actually, from recycling to circular, added value can be produced, whilst you also restore, you combat climate change and you restore nature. So I think it's a different paradigm, but we need to do that internationally, so everybody is held to the same chart. We can't ask developing countries to do it differently because we've messed it up as rich countries, because we've polluted. That's not their problem, but we need to engage and provide for the right choices, and we need to support that in a big way financially.
Okay, we need to shift the paradigm. We need to guide people, bring people along the journey towards this circular economy. But what are the obstacles then? What is stopping in the next I don't know, year, 2 years, just a circular economy emerging?
Well, I think there are a number of very practical obstacles which are sadly long-standing, that when it comes to the investment case, it's often been treated still as a case of development financing, which is always, it's catalytic, but it's never significant. We need to provide for the governance framework. We need to get local communities on board. I think it doesn't take much to bring them on board because they live in an environment that is heavily affected by the lack of development prospects, including pollution, the absence of a proper economic system. And I think we need to bring big, significant financing to scale, and that's a duty we have internationally. And the rest can be done. It's political will.
Political will, but also business. I mean, we talked about consumers, we talked about communities, big business.
Big business needs to go it along. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, I was at Davos, as a number of us were, I think, in different capacities. And the circular economy was still treated as something, as a bit of a sideshow. I'm relieved to see it now as being center stage, and I think it's also because the government, my colleagues, Tientje van Veldhoven and Cora van Nieuwenhuizen, they've been pushing it, but the Dutch government has been pushing it. It needs to be treated as essential. It's the right way to conduct business, and any other way to conduct business shouldn't be any longer supported.
But what's the government's role in stimulating businesses seeing it as essential?
We're starting here, but there's also a role for shareholders. We've seen that before when it comes to shareholders that make the right choices. You need to assess your investments against the climate index, but also around the index of the circular economy. The difference that you want to make, the impact and the footprint you want to leave behind, be it when it comes to climate impact or the positive impact you leave behind when you engage in a circular economy. It's a tidal wave. What we're engaging in is discuss, talk, provide the advocacy. We get the investors around the table. We have countries, Costa Rica, the EU, the Commissioner, of course, the African Development Bank. This is a shareholder engagement politically from the private sector, the investors, and of course, governments that are deeply in need of this model. But we all are. But for instance, from an EU perspective, we can be ahead of the curve if we choose to be so, and we can lead the way and enable and assist others to get there. And those, again, are policy and political choices.
Policy and political choices, but I still find it difficult to imagine that we can win the hearts and minds of shareholders, institutional shareholders, people used to getting their dividends every year, and
You'd be
convincing
surprised.
them.
You'd be surprised. I mean, we've developed here in the Netherlands a policy around responsible business conduct, as an example, and we've sort of moved the needle on climate investments. And it's the big entrepreneurs, big businesses, but also small to medium enterprises. They know the current way of producing consumer has run its course. They also know that societies are changing, and if you want to be building a world for future generations, and actually you want your business to thrive, you need to adapt, you need to change. And so I think responsible business conduct also opts towards investing in the circular economy. I think we should move away from the branding business as not interested, and it's only one for governments or, for instance, civil society. A number of responsible CEOs and business leaders want to find their way, and we need to also support them or provide for the fiscal stimulus, as well as the pricing or the taxation when you do not want to move this way. That's where governments come in. But I wouldn't call it a black or white scenario. But we need to find the alliance and a coalition of the willing, and I think a lot of them are here today and are speaking and are listening.
There's a lot of willing people.
So proof of concept is always important.
Okay, let's get concrete then and bring it home to the Netherlands. What goals would you like to see set, or what goals have already been set with respect to the circular economy here in the Netherlands?
Well, we can also be more ambitious, I think. I'm not jumping ahead of our next government, but if we were to be joining government, and if we have the progressive touches and impact that a government should have, you'll see a lot more on the investments and the benchmarks around the circular economy, moving it from plastic packs to sort of, I wouldn't call it the fringes, but make it more a centerpiece. And I think those choices can be made, but that's all part of the negotiations.
Okay. Good goals. And if we don't meet them, I'll be knocking on your door in 2050 saying, what's happened?
2050, I'm long gone, dead and buried. But you can come and talk to me before. Just vote for next time.
Okay, clear. And now, unfortunately, you have to leave us. You have another pressing engagement. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And your colleague Kitty van der Heijden will be
our Vice Minister. I apologize to my distinguished panelists, and I'm sure you have very interesting examples and advice for us as well. And I'm listening also to the Commissioner and, of course, the African Bank and my colleague from Costa Rica. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's get the perspective of our other guests. But before we do so, let's have a look at some circular economy projects underway in Africa right now.
This is a shaman community where Safisana is promoting a concept of circular economy approach to sanitation. The food market is where bulk organic waste is generated.
The volume of rubbish in Ashaman is a big problem for us. Sometimes when it rains, this whole market is a mess. People have no proper way of disposing of waste, so they leave them in the drain.
Trained Safisana personnel sort and collect organic waste from the market, industry, slaughterhouses, and restaurants. In collaboration with fecal truck drivers, large volume of fecal waste is collected and sent to the Safisana site. Waste from the different sources are inspected and fed into this digester. Through anaerobic digestion, biogas is produced and used for electricity generation, which is fed into the national grid. This approach underscores the circular economy concept, where waste is taken from the community, processed into useful materials, and goes back into the community.
Now, I've been joined at the table by Vice Minister Kitty van der Heijden. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Ikenna.
Okay, let's go straight over to Dr. Kariuki. We've just seen a video of a small energy company, successful, and they are working in a circular fashion. Why aren't bigger companies doing the same thing, though?
I think the answer is that circular economy is a relatively new development concept. And further, since most circular economy activities in Africa happen in the informal sector, there is not a significant or reasonable pipeline of businesses and industries or projects that conform to circularity. So that's basically the reason why we do not have enough projects. But this is something that we envisage that will take root, as has just been explained by the minister before she left. This is something that is coming up, and I think people are becoming more conscious that there is an absolute need to invest and engage in the circular economy.
And you used to work in the energy industry prior to your political career. You used to work in the private sector. On the basis of that experience, what would you say, and the role that you now have, what are the do's and don'ts when it comes to creating a circular energy business?
First of all, I'm not in the political arena, I'm actually in the public sector. I work for the African Development Bank. But, the issue of the do's or don'ts may not be particularly applicable right now because we don't have enough evidence to support that these projects cannot be available or applicable in the commercial sense. We do believe that there are these opportunities. And in this regard, perhaps I can just mention some of the things that the bank is doing. To try and I can mention a few projects which we consider it's sufficiently catalytic and that could stimulate the growth of circular production.
Okay.
I think one is very similar to what you just said, and this is we have a $20 million financing climate resilient agriculture practices in Ghana, which provides, which is a women-led farmers association with solar pumps and efficient irrigation systems to address scarcity and a variability of rainfall, particularly during periods of drought. In this regard, I must observe that promoting circularity in agricultural systems is particularly relevant in the African context, given that the continent's food system is expected to be worth trillions of dollars by 2030, and that the sector employs 60% of sub-Saharan workforce, while contributing up to 23% of the continent's GDP. There are other projects, for example, and this is takes into cognizance what you mentioned earlier, because one of the things is, apart from the informal sector, as you indicated, I actually was in the private sector in power, and one of the things is that the issue or in order to fuel Africa's industrialization ambition, it is important that we adopt low carbon and sustainable energy, which is a key principle of circularity, and in order to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions.
Dr. Kariuki, before you go on to your to complete the second example and the third, I'd love to create time for our other speakers as well. But you pointed out a great circular project there. The solar farm sounds like it ticks all the circular boxes, as it were. Let me go to Mr. Sinkevičius. The EU created a platform, the Global Alliance on the Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, which reflects international values. But what are the concrete goals that you hope to accomplish through that platform?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And I will start by, in general, probably the most important, we're speaking here about the circular economy and our, of course, circular economy action plan, which is can be only success if it's global. And of course, that's a big claim. But we are providing the actions to match. We have a good understanding of what's needed, and we want to share this awareness with the rest of the world. And that's why we adopted last March the second Circular Economy Action Plan, fully aligned with the European Green Deal. And there are 35 different actions, all working together to take us to circularity and climate neutrality, together with the horizontal actions across the economy. The focus is on key value chains, areas with clear sustainability challenges and the most gains, such as textiles, buildings.
But Mr. Sinkevičius, I wish we had time for all 35 specific actions, but give me some practical examples. What will the EU action plan or what will GESERI achieve? Are we talking about more financing, more money available for circular projects? Are we talking about data sharing? What are the concrete things that you're actually going to do with the platform?
Okay, so first of all, GESERI is all about helping our partners achieve sustainable consumption and production and getting closer to the goals of the Paris Agreement, halting and reversing biodiversity loss, and of course, curbing pollution. And the goal is a common strategy, first of all, to identify barriers and government gaps that hinder circular and just transitions, while of course avoiding duplication and leaving no one behind. And this, of course, definitely needs a sufficient funding, which, of course, EU is ready to support our partners from in this case, let's speak directly from Africa and Latin America.
Okay, so there's more money on the way for projects in across Africa and Latin America. Great news, Minister Meza. Did you hear that? There's more money coming your way.
Absolutely. These are great news.
What are the sorts
what we want to hear?
When you are considering making new partnerships in order to create this circular economy a reality, what sort of things do you consider when you're considering those new partnerships?
Yes, one element is that there is a lot of interest in circular economy in the region. And for this reason, we launched this coalition of governments in the Forum of Ministers of Environment, and it was adopted. And we have a steering committee where we have Colombia, Peru, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, to define also what would be the strategies. We know that as governments, we need to give clear policies, standards, incentives. We need to generate these enabling conditions, and we need to learn how to do this. And of course, to be these knowledge sharing, promoting pilot projects, and of course, try to engage with the private sector. We totally agree that we need to work this with the private sector as well. So part of this coalition is to bring this, align the policies and give clear messages to the private sector. This is something that we want to include in our long-term strategies of climate, that it is good for biodiversity, and that it is good for the economy as well.
I mean, messages sound great, but hard-nosed business people need more than messages, I think. How are you going to encourage them politely, maybe force even, to become more circular?
Yes, and I totally agree that it is not easy sometimes to really transform these political messages into action. But at the end, what we have, the tools and the instruments that we have, it's a little bit to incentivize, to use incentives, or to use at the same time taxes or other elements for the activities that are polluting. And I think that this is very strong. And also sometimes just clear legislation and policies, legislations, incentives. I mean, we know what the tools are. But of course, there is another element, consumers. And I want to bring that to the table as well. And we need to, keep on moving with campaigns. I totally agree that the new generations are so clear, and then they are demanding new ways of performing from the public sector and from the private sector as well. And I think that this is very powerful.
Clear. Thank you very much. What do you think of what you've heard so far, Kitty?
Look, I think all are stressing that it's not just up to governments to do this. Right? We need the private sector. We definitely need laws, incentives, and policies. I think what we also need is the world of science. So it's great to have ambitions, such as the Dutch ambitions, to have the use of primary commodities by 2030 and to be fully circular by 2050. That's highly ambitious. But how do we measure along the way? Are we on the right track? How can we accelerate? What can we learn from Africa? What can we learn from Latin America? The wisdom isn't always in our hands. So
and
really
how can we create that shared knowledge system?
I think there are many ways in which we can do that. In the Netherlands, we have created the Uitvoeringsprogramma Circular Economy. So it's basically 600 partners from private sector, public sector, NGOs, the science world, really keeping each other sharp. How do we move forward? And we report to Parliament every year. Then we have, obviously, our connections with Latin America, with the Circular Economy program for Latin America and Caribbean, with Africa. And we really need to start learning from each other. And this is not a one-way street.
Okay, so what can we learn? What can, Dr. Kariuki, what can Kenya teach, or what can you teach the Netherlands when it comes to the circular economy?
There's really not much, I'm talking from a bank perspective. There's not much we can be able to teach, but what we must be able to do is that we must find ways of collaborating. We must find ways of fostering. I mean, it's standard, as the lady just mentioned. What is key is that we must be able to foster enabling environments for investments.
That's
we
clear.
Must look for
and
ways
Minister
of
Meza, what do you think? Is there something that you can teach then? What is happening in your world that you think this should be replicated elsewhere? This is a great idea.
Yes, one is a small entrepreneur that generated this app and that was, bringing like a value in your efforts of doing of recycling, and then she was also engaging and connected with other private companies. And at the end, if you demonstrate that that you are reducing your waste, then you will get these coins like eco coins, and the business that are part of this network, then you can use those coins in those businesses. And I think that this is great. It's really to transfer this paradigm. This is not waste anymore. This is something that we can use in other productive area. And as this, there is also one thing, for example, in the pineapple industry, which sometimes we're really facing a lot of environmental issues. And there are also exploring with science what to do with the waste of the pineapple. And they are creating these, how do you call these, that you use for wearing, I forgot the word in English, I'm sorry, tejidos. And that is something that they are using again in these other areas. So I think that there's, if we go into the field, if we go to the communities, if we go to the private sector, we will be identifying this. And I think that what is attractive when we are creating coalitions and platforms is to really scale up and learn this knowledge.
Clear. Mr. Sinkevičius, are we thinking big enough? What's your reaction to what you've heard so far?
I think Latin America and African countries are key partners for you when it comes to global environmental and climate issues. Concretely on circular economy question, we're already working together, many channels. We have regular policy dialogues, development cooperation projects such as Switch to Green Flagship Initiative or EU Latin America Alliance for Sustainable Growth program. There is also research cooperation, and very soon, pandemic permitting, I hope to start the circular economy missions again, supporting business contacts on circular economy. These have been very successful in the past, and I very much look forward to restarting the process.
How have they been successful in the past?
First of all, because of course, sharing experiences, finding common projects, meeting business people, matching them, and so on. They've been able to form a successful teams and projects. In the near future, our cooperation needs to focus on sectors where Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean are trying to scale up their circular economy transition. So I'm thinking in particular of pollution mitigation, waste management, and more sustainable production and consumption. And we already discussed earlier this year, and we're already engaging in a fruitful dialogue. We want, of course, to reinforce cooperation between Latin America and the Caribbean and the EU, in particular looking at the green recovery and strengthening the coherence of the policies related to the circular economy.
Yeah. Kitty, we're in the middle of a pandemic, though. These are all really grand, big ideas. People are, concerned in the short term with vaccines and with jobs. Is the pandemic holding back this momentum to create a circular economy, or is it an opportunity?
I think if you allow it to hold you back, you're very myopic. The pandemic is actually related to pollution, to loss of biodiversity, to climate change, right? These are interconnected systems. And so if we are serious about the pandemic, we better make damn sure that we start to reduce our pollution, that we reduce our carbon footprint. Circular economy will win us 20% reduction in emissions. We need that to get to a net zero economy as a global world, to avoid pollution, but also to avoid impacting the lives and livelihoods of people that had nothing to do with all of this. So you just asked, are we thinking big enough? And let's be honest and frank, the answer is no. We are losing the time to keep the world of 1.5 degrees within our grasp for the next generation. So we better make sure that we start to incentivize, that we talk about this not as a cost, but as a business opportunity. And the biggest opportunity, let's not forget that, will be in Africa, will be in Latin America, where reusing and recycling waste is much more ingrained in the system than it is in our commercial system, our consumerist society, where we just toss away. So I think there are business opportunities for developing countries, and we, with best practices and international cooperation, should allow developing countries to become part of a new value chain. And let's not let waste get to waste.
Yeah. I'd like to talk more about that potential for a new value chain in a minute. First of all, though, I'd like to do a couple of other things, one of which is to open the digital floor to our audience. What questions do you have for our speakers? First, though, another short video, and this one features a small South African circular fashion company.
While the concept of sustainable living is a relatively new concept in the modern, largely westernized world we live in, for these communities, sustainable living has always been a way of being. We merely need to remember and reconnect with Indlela Yethu, our way of being.
Woven is a textiles innovations company
that manufactures 100% recycled fabrics from off-cut fabric or textile waste.
We aim to create a circular loop in this fashion industry.
The planet is suffering as a result of this industry. We simply have to find better ways to produce the fabrics that we all love.
What you see around me is textile waste collected from clothing manufacturers in South Africa. We divert this textile waste.
We essentially seek to take this textile waste that is just sitting in landfill and essentially recycle it into 100% recycled fabrics that are the same quality as fabrics made from virgin cotton and look exactly the same as fabrics made from virgin cotton.
And we repurpose it into the fabric that you see in stores across the country.
Yeah, another inspirational video there. Right, let's take a couple of questions from our viewers. And this first one is for Minister Meza. What are the main obstacles to circular economy transition in Latin America and your suggestions to overcoming them? Let's take a couple. Focus on two, let's say.
First, that we don't have the right legislation right now. We still have challenges in the legislation part, of course, in the part of incentives, and then resources to start this and to also support our local communities and our local governments and our local companies. We need resources, and that is one thing that we are facing, a very small fiscal space right now in most of our countries, and this is something that it is challenging. So I will say yes, we need to address and improve our policy framework, our legislation, incentives, but at the same time to bring these packages of financial support to the different stakeholders at the local level. And this is something that we're missing. And for this reason, when I was hearing what Minister Kaag was saying, and also the European Union, I think that this is what we really require, to have access to finance, to really implement this kind of projects.
Well, I know someone on this panel who works at a bank who might have a little bit of money free for some circular economy projects. Dr. Kareyuki, what do you think about that question? What are the obstacles? One of the major obstacles, as Minister Meza has pointed out, is financing. Is the bank open to financing new circular projects? Of course it is.
Indeed, we look at this as economic opportunities, especially in Africa. But I think for us to be able to achieve the vision for circularity, as I had probably tried to mention earlier, it is absolutely imperative that we foster enabling environment for investment. In that case, we will also facilitate access to concessional finance in order to de-risk this project. But also, governments must also find ways of regulating informal activities in the waste sector, the trade in recyclable material, etc., etc. So the long and short of it is that we, as a bank, would be very keen to support these projects. But I think there are certain things that are imperative that must be established in order for us to be able to achieve this vision of circularity.
Okay, clear. We'll come back to maybe fleshing out what exactly an enabling environment for financing circular projects looks like. I'd like a bit more clarity on that. But let's go to the next question, which was on my iPad and it seems to have disappeared. From Osgul, this question, how can private banks be more supportive of social enterprises who are testing out new circular solutions? So kind of startups. Dr. Kariuki, perhaps you can follow up on that.
See, the two questions are basically interlinked because private sector will obviously be looking at the rates of return. They want to be guaranteed returns. And therefore, when it comes to the issue of circular economy, there has to be a way of guaranteeing that the material is available, because otherwise they will not be able to sustain productive or production that is required to meet their production targets and the returns that they are looking for. They need stable environment. Where you ask the question, what does an enabling environment require? They need a stable regulatory environment. They need the right fiscal incentives. For example, there's what we call the waste taxonomy, or to prevent imports of materials that cannot be economically recycled. So that in a way you are ensuring or guaranteeing that work or whatever production they are involved in will be able to be sustained. And then, of course, there is always the issue of transfer of technologies, because that would be probably on the social side, whereby these private companies are working with the local companies to create what I would call the complete value chain that ensures the success of these private enterprises.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kariuki. The next question is from Claudia, and that's for Mr. Sinkevičius. How about global and European sharing of the much needed new technologies, biogas, cellulose products, to transition to the circular economy?
I mean, of course, many technologies are still in the development phase, but we are absolutely open for a cooperation, with countries outside the EU and through different platforms. And as I mentioned, our circular economy missions. This is exactly this kind of a good examples where entrepreneurs can meet and work together on certain projects. But most importantly now is probably, of course, providing a sufficient funding for research and innovation, especially for SMEs who usually don't have, budget aside for research and so on. And I'm very happy that with our new Horizon program, But then also with the Next Generation EU, we will be stepping up sufficiently funding of innovation ecosystems here in the EU. Most importantly, that the two main direction which Commission is setting forward is digitalization and, of course, European Green Deal.
Very clear. Good to hear that you're releasing more funds for those sorts of initiatives. Thank you. The last question is for you, Kitty, from Sandra. How can countries find out more about local initiatives and share them? It seems that is lacking. So just finding circular initiatives.
I do think that that is a big issue, right? And we really have to learn from each other. I do think there are quite a number of platforms already existing. I mentioned the Africa Circular Economy Alliance. We have the Latin American and Caribbean Circular Economy Alliance. We have the GACIRE program. And let's not forget, all countries, including ours, we have a whole network of embassies and consulate generals that are incredibly motivated and inspired to work on circular economy projects, that are in need of finding innovative projects. I just had a look at the annual plans for all our embassies. 80% of them, from a trade and investment and development perspective, say we must embed and mainstream circularity. We must find local partners. Because let's be honest, the grey and brown economy is the economy of the past. If you want to move forward, it's got to be circular and it's got to be green. So we see this as an opportunity to grow business in a sustainable way that's inclusive, leaving no one behind, but also that works to tomorrow's economy. Waste is actually something that is gold.
And who's making the most progress when it comes to the circular economy, do you think?
Look, before I'm accused of doing politics.
Oh, here we go. The Netherlands.
No, I think that's a question that science should bear out. And I think that's why I mentioned science really is a big part of this community, I would say, because let's just think of a carbon price. 20% of emissions can be had through a circular economy. Now, who is going to measure exactly what your reduction pathways are in certain product lines? We are going to need science to actually help us out, to make sure that once that carbon price hits, we can actually accelerate towards a green and circular economy. So I do think this is a question that science can probably answer best, but being Dutch, what can I say?
Yeah, next time we've got to invite science to the table.
Absolutely.
Science, where are you? Okay, Minister Meza, we touched on it a little bit earlier. Let's talk about waste management, waste treatment, and trade or the potential for trade in waste, what that could mean for you. Do you see the potential for Latin America to become a kind of recycling hub?
Well, I think that there's a big interest in the matter, and that we are, analyzing how the ecosystem looks like and what are the enabling conditions that we must create. And I think that, yes, in Latin America, and as you were saying, we have been identifying a lot of small projects, pilot projects. And I think that what is very important right now in this decisive decade is how can we scale up? And this is always something that we don't have the answers sometimes, because we know that there's like small projects and cooperation projects or private initiatives. And sometimes it's not so easy to be connecting the dots. And I think that this is what we need right now, to have these clear policies, to have these conversations with the private sector, to do this enabling condition. And I think that this will allow us to connect these different initiatives and do this scale-up process.
Now, that's clear. Don't the alarm bells, though, go off? Let's take another region. Let's look at the African region, Dr. Kariuki. Isn't there a risk that Africa as a recycling hub is just a kind of synonym for dumping ground for e-waste or waste of useless waste, for instance? Although I shouldn't say that any waste is useless, but Kitty is waving a finger at me.
No, I actually don't think so. What I think is that there is an economic opportunity for African countries to create regional manufacturing and recycling hubs that process and transform second-hand materials into value-added goods. I mean, I think I was talking to somebody, consider this. The value of raw materials in Africa's e-waste, what you've just mentioned, is estimated at $3.2 billion. That's a lot of money. Yet, Africa is currently at the bottom of the global value chain, with its share of global manufacturing at only about 1.9%. There should be impetus for industrialization, therefore, centered around circular economy principles of refurbishing, recycling, and even manufacturing.
$3.2 billion worth of value on the continent. How is the African Development Bank going to sway support to exploit that economic potential then? What are you doing to build support?
So the one thing that we are doing is that, as our colleague just mentioned earlier, us at the African Development Bank, we are hosting the Africa Circular Economy Alliance. Here we are establishing working groups with our strategic partners to collectively drive the circular economy action in promising sectors and harness the short-term opportunities that have been identified in a recent survey that was undertaken. That's what we call the 5 big bets for circular economy. That's number one. And number two, as the African Development Bank, we are very keen to leverage on our networks to bring on board new partners for the scale-up of the Africa Circular Economy Facility. Additionally, the bank has actually committed to mobilizing $25 billion in climate finance over the next 5 years, of which the circular economy falls under this particular concept, so to speak.
Okay, 2. I'm sorry, I was waiting for a third point, but 2 is good. 2 is good. Minister Meza, you've already mentioned a couple of the obstacles towards exploiting or making the most out of the potential for in a transition to the circular economy. But this is your opportunity to pinpoint one, to call out an organization or whoever it is and say, look, this is what we need in order to help us make the transition. What would that be?
Just one. I would say that right now, transfer of technology, it's a critical one. And it will be very critical in this transition.
Transfer from who to who, and what sort of technology?
Yes, I mean, there's right now in the waste management and the way to transform this into energy or into other materials that we can use in other value chains. There is in the different sectors, there is a lot of technology there. And I will say that, yes, sometimes this is from the north to the south, some of this technology, but also from south to south. But this element of transfer of technology is so critical.
Okay, Kitty, you said 5 minutes ago, the Netherlands is a world leader, pretty much. You've heard the request from Minister Meza for technology. How can the government stimulate that?
Look, I think we're already doing that. And let's be honest, as I said, I don't think we're going fast and far enough, right? So there's still a lot to improve. But if I look at how we've mainstreamed circularity, for example, in our development cooperation programming, not as a theme, but in everything we do, we think about how can we make this circular? What are we doing? Whether it's food, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's biomass, right? So this becomes a driver for change across the programs. We do the same when it comes to trade and investment policies, right? And so trying to really bring this in through a whole suite of policies that we work on is incredibly important to actually start to accelerate. Money will always matter, but money to me really is a much smaller problem. The real problem is sharing of best practices, finding the way, a platform. And, you know, this is only one, but Minister Meza, we have the Holland Circular Hotspot, which is a public-private partnership of many collaborators, again, from all walks of society, really looking at how do we accelerate, both here in the Netherlands, but also making sure that we transport those lessons to other countries. So this is really a way. We have also the international partnership, the PACE, the platform to accelerate circular economy. So there are these platforms. We need to find them, as you mentioned. We need to utilize them to accelerate. That's what we need.
Okay, we have platforms galore.
Platforms galore. Getting it done is what matters more.
Okay, I'd like to let's get even more practical. But before we do so, I'd like to run another short video.
Antes de la llegada de la fábrica solamente aprovechábamos del coco lo que era la carne. Ni el agua ni la estopa no se utilizaban. Yo como productor de coco ha cambiado la forma de que mi coco se pueda vender a un buen precio y que sea una compra segura. Desde que la fábrica está aquí ha cambiado en que hay empleo para la gente de la región.
We like working with the cocoa substrate because it's a sustainable and renewable product, and furthermore it is available locally, lower prices, lower freight costs. They bring the many years of expertise and transferring that technology into Mexican production. Upon the end of the life of the crop, we pretend to reuse the remaining product and incorporate it into our fields and expect this will work as a land improver or soil improver.
Okay, I think a question I have is what do we want this conference to actually achieve? Let's do the rounds and let's focus on being very very practical, because I like that. Dr. Kariuki, let's start with you. What do you want this conference to achieve?
No, I think this conference should be a good basis for sharing knowledge, because we have African and global stakeholders who have different experiences, and together we can advance the circular economy agenda by sharing these knowledges. I think somebody talked about the European Commission on Global Alliance, Circular Economy and Resource and Efficiency, and the Latin America Caribbean Circular Economy Coalition. I think what we need to do is to ensure that we have a concerted voice that clearly demonstrates or strongly articulates that this is the way to go. It is not something that we prefer, but rather this is the way to go, because I do believe that the circular economy offers a viable development strategy, and it could be privileged to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. As somebody, also one of the panelists also mentioned, it helps in achievement of the Paris Agreement goals, and also from the Africa perspective, the Africa Union's Agenda 2063. So I think the story here should be that we should strongly advocate for circular economy at whatever forum that we can.
That's clear. That's clear. That's the goal of this conference. I mean, but you highlight the need to share knowledge, share the collective learnings. There's been a lot of knowledge and a lot of learning already shared. What's your takeaway then? What have you learned?
I think from my perspective from this conference is that whereas to a large extent the circular economy is a new development concept, we should not relegate it to the sidelines. What I have learned today, and I heard it from the Dutch minister very, very strongly, is that the circular economy should take center stage as far as as a development agenda is concerned.
It doesn't get more center stage than it's in the title of the conference, Dr. Kariuki. This is the World Circular Economy Forum,
yes, it is.
So we know that.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Sinkevičius, what would you say? What have you learned before I go back to what you'd like this conference to achieve?
I probably can say that it was the most important to hear a clear messages and commitments from our partners in Latin America and Africa, and willingness to even deepen cooperation and look for additional opportunities, especially post-pandemic, to make and ensure that the recovery is actually green. And circular economy exactly is a perfect platform for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what would you like this conference to achieve? Something very practical, very concrete?
I would say, first of all, sending a very clear message. I think before you asked about how to convince business, because business sometimes not always is willing to get on board. So it's a very clear message that it's a win-win solution, and especially for businesses. And of course for countries. When we do math here at home, we find out that higher recycling targets should help us not only avoid 477 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions between 2015 and 2035, but also at the same time creating 140,000 direct jobs. So these efforts, of course, will continue, and I want that this sort of sends a very clear message that there is a vast opportunity. And most importantly, that dealing with waste in a suitable, in a circular manner is important, because otherwise, if you burn it, if you ship it, or whatever, you just kill innovation. You kill those possibilities of jobs, and then you also fail to achieve climate objectives. So I think the message here is clear, and I hope that it spreads as wide as possible.
Thank you very much. And Minister Meza, what would you say you've learned first of all from the conference? And let's deal with that first.
Yes, I've been learning, and especially I've been learning, of course, from listening from my colleagues, but also from the videos. I think the videos have been so inspiring, and we need success stories, and this is the kind of practical elements. Yes, we need to address the global issues and the international negotiations and to see all these interlinkages, but we also need concrete aspects, and I'm so practical as well. And I will say that what do I expect from this forum right now is to consolidate a global community of circular economy.
Very clear. Thank you very much. And Kitty?
Wow. First, let me say what I've learned is, again, that this is a complex issue that touches on almost anything in economic life, whether it is, I deal with development cooperation, but this is about trade and industrial policies, but it's all equally about environmental regulation, it's about labor policies, about the investment regime. So unless you get a government to act as a cohesive, coordinated, coherent whole, countries will never achieve circular economy. And that goes for countries and it goes for the world. In terms of what I want to achieve in this conference a much higher sense of urgency, I think a lot of people have spoken lofty words about how important circular economy is, but we need to get it done, and we need to get it done before 2030, 2050. We are running out of time. What we have done in this part of the world is that we have left all the pollution in the doorsteps, in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia. And it's time that they start to use this as a business model, not just to recycle, but as far as I'm concerned, to upcycle, to use what they get from the waste, to add value to it, to grow their economies, to grow decent jobs, and to get better from the waste that we generate.
Okay, we need urgency. What is the first phone call or email you're going to make tomorrow as regards circular economy?
Tomorrow I'll go back to all the embassies that I've mentioned before. 80% of our embassies and consulate generals want to work more on circular economy. They have a standing instruction to look for partners, to find innovative business models, because we can help them scale. So I'm going to tell them again, I spoke to Ikenna, I spoke to colleagues from Costa Rica, from Africa, from Europe, and they said the same thing. We can do it, but we need you at local level. Think global, act global, get it done.
Oh,
I'm going to hold you accountable.
Powerful, Kissy. What a lovely end to the session. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of our guests. My takeaway, I guess, would be, like Kitty and Mr. Sinkevičius. We see there's so much opportunity there. So much opportunity, but we need to hurry up. We're running out of time.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists, Dr. Kariuki, Minister Meza, and Commissioner Sinkevičius, as well as our co-host, Kitty. Thank you very much for joining us. And Minister Kaag, wherever you are, thank you. Please stay with us for more exciting sessions, videos and discussions. Thank you for being with us. See you again soon.